Today we are beginning our discussion on angle relationships, and we are going to focus on 5 different kinds today. 2 of those are what we call complementary angles and supplementary angles. When I have complementary angles, that means that I have 2 angles that sum to 90 degrees. So if I was to draw a picture of these 2 angles, I would draw a picture like this. Here's my 90-degree angle, and this angle with this angle together are my complementary angles. When I have equations, complementary angles always sum to 90 degrees. So A plus B equals 90. When I have supplementary angles instead of complementary angles, I have 2 angles that sum to 180 degrees. So my picture looks something like this, and I will have this angle and this angle together sum to equal 180. So let's go ahead and take a look at identifying what some examples of supplementary angles are. So if I have supplementary angles, this is just 2 angles that together sum to 90 degrees or 180 degrees. So things that are 180 degrees would be like a straight line. So I would be looking at angle A and angle B. So supplementary angles, use the angle sign, angle A and angle B. Complementary angles are 2 angles that sum to 90 degrees. So in this case, I'm looking for a 90-degree angle that has 2 smaller angles that make it up. One of those can be C, and one of those can be D. So complementary angles would be angle C and angle D. The other 3 kinds of angles we're going to talk about today are linear pairs, vertical angles, and straight angles. A linear pair are 2 angles that sum to 180 degrees. And that is exactly the same thing as supplementary angles, but linear pairs must share a side. So if I'm going to draw a picture, then when I have a linear pair, they have to share a side. So I can see that they're sharing this side here, and it would be this angle and this angle. And they have the same definition other than having to share a side as supplementary angles, so they are supplementary. So A plus B equals 180 degrees. Vertical angles, once again, we're talking about 2 angles. These are 2 angles opposite each other when 2 lines cross, and they are congruent. So if I'm going to look at a picture here, I'll draw a similar picture to what I had for linear pairs. They are going to cross at this point here. And then I see that this and this are vertical angles. So A equals B. If I was to fold my if I was to fold my picture in half, I should find that those angles sit perfectly on top of one another. A straight angle is simply a straight line that measures 180 degrees. So I've got a straight line, and the way we would draw that would be like this, 180 degrees. So anytime you know you have a straight angle, you know it equals 180. This is the one that we will use the least out of the 5 types of angles that we've talked about today. So let's go ahead and use this picture to identify a linear pair and to identify vertical angles. So I know that a linear pair has to be 2 angles on a straight line. So here's my straight line. There has to be 2 angles on the straight line that together sum to 180 degrees. So if I look, I have E and D. So my linear pair would be angle E and angle D. And remember, they have to share that side. And they have to sum to 180 degrees. And they do that by simply existing on a straight angle. My vertical angles are 2 angles that together are going to be congruent, and they have to be perfectly across from one another. So they have to share a point. So if I look here, if I look at angle A and angle D, these two are congruent. I could take these two and I could fold them over one another. So I'm looking at this line and I'm looking at this line. So together, those two I could fold over and I would have then my vertical angles. So angle A and angle D. So let's go ahead and take a look at this picture and identify all of our pairs. So remember that complementary angles must have 2 angles that sum to 90 degrees. It's not 2 90-degree angles, but it's 2 angles that together will sum to that 90 degrees. So that would be angle A and angle E. A linear pair are 2 angles that share a side, and they are on a straight line. So that I'm looking at angle B and angle C. And if it is a linear pair, it also has to be supplementary angles. So we can name that for both of them. And then my vertical angles, these are angles that could be folded on top of one another, and they create that X. So if I look, here is my X, and so my vertical angles would be angle A and angle C. So let's talk about what this equation shows. This equation, 4x plus 16 equals 100, it shows things that are complementary, supplementary, or congruent. Well, if they're complementary, they have to equal 90. If they're supplementary, they have to equal 180. And if they're congruent, they have to be equal. So if it's not set equal to 180 and it's not set equal to 90, then that means that it must be things that are congruent. So that means that 4x plus 16 is one of my angles and 100 is the other angle. So what are kinds of angles that are congruent? It could be vertical angles is the only option we have. So if we're going to draw a picture of vertical angles, I'm going to have 2 angles that form an X, this angle here could be 100 degrees, and this angle here can be represented by 4x plus 16. And that shows how I can take this equation and end up with a picture. Let's try one more. This time I see that my equation is set equal to 90. Well, complementary angles are what's set equal to 90. That's the only kind. So when I'm looking, I have a right angle, and it has two angles that come out of it. And those two angles here would be 5x and would be 40. And so then if I set up an equation, 5x plus 40 equals 90. And that shows that I have complementary angles.